Hey, this is Pat from Blades Over the Horizon, and I'm gonna show you how we configure our fish today. So we'll start with this smooth-tailed trevally, and there's gonna be 100 of this fish in the Boid actor. I'm gonna show you how we define the behavior of the fish, and that involves our own graph type. It's called a Boid Graph. Name it behavior, and we'll open it up. Inside, we're going to make a sink node, and all the nodes will drain into the sink. I'm going to just connect some empties to this. No force. Score older higher. And forbid sensing. Now the first thing I'm going to get in depth about is the spawn drain. We'll start with spawning on a unit sphere, which means 1 centimeter radius sphere. We're gonna spawn our Boid. We'll save this, and we'll apply our graph to the Boid actor and enter play mode. And you'll see we've got 100 fish now on this small 1 centimeter radius of location. So we'll go back to our Boid graph, and we'll take that location and we're gonna scale location. We'll scale it by 300 on each axis and connect it. Save. Enter play mode, and you can see there. Now we have a sphere of 300 centimeters radius of fish. 100 fish. So let's have a velocity. We'll have it be random between -100 and +100 on each axis. And we'll connect it. Save. And you can see when the game starts up, they have an initial velocity. The rate that they break is determined by the species. So this graph can be worked between species, and each species has its own configuration. I'm not going to get into that part with this video, but that's why they stop. And we'll have them face their initial velocity. Save. And now you can see they actually face the direction that they had initially. Cool. So next I'm gonna come back to the spawn node to show you some other things after I start explaining the drive node. So let's set this force that we have connected to the sink to 200 on X. Save. And you'll see that causes them to just swim forever without stopping. So I'm going to show you a new node that we came up with, which is the gate. It runs a yes or a no, and it does, by default it does 240 ticks yes, 240 ticks no. And all the Boids in the simulation run at 480 hertz. So this is 1 second when you sum the two. So it's half a second on, half a second off, and it does this forever. So we'll take our forward drive force, connect it. We'll make a new drive force and connect it to no. And we'll have no force on the no. And we'll see what that looks like. You can see they kind of speed up and then slow down, speed up and slow down, speed up and slow down. And if I go back to the graph and I adjust the gate to have it be no for 3 times as much, you can see it's even more noticeable. But you can also see that it's even more noticeable that they're all thinking at the same time. They all have the same internal clock, which does not look natural. So what we do, we go back to our spawn and we do a random counter, and this gives each member of the Boid a value that is ideally different from others. So when we start now, we can see they're not aligned in time. They're each kind of on their own clock, which is ideal. Might not be ideal for every situation, but for this one, I think it looks pretty good. So let's get back to that drive node for a second and try and make it do something a little nicer. So when it's not moving, we're going to have it turning. And we're going to do 400 units around Z for the angular. And let's see what that looks like. It's a little strong, so I'm going to scale that down to 200 around Z. It's still quite strong. Alright, so now we're going to get into the two sense nodes. We'll come back to drive once we have something smart set up with sensing. So what the sense node does is it says, can I see this? Should I be able to sense this or not? And right now we're saying no, can't see anything. So we're going to change it to say, well, what's the distance to the eye? We're going to say at 9 meters, 900 centimeters. If it's greater than that, we're going to say no. So at 900 centimeters, greater, no. Anything that's not plugged in is a yes. It can be sensed. So we're also going to limit the angle of from the eye. So if the angle, we'll say 60 degrees, if there's 60 degrees of variance more than that, we're going to also forbid. But when the distance is 900 or less, we'll check the angle. And if it's less or equal to 60 degrees, we'll allow it. So that's how sensing works. Now, a fish can only sense, let's say one species can only sense up to 8 fish at a time and track 8 fish at a time. That's how it works in nature. So what we have to do is we deal with the score drain. And what that does is it takes 2 other fish at a time and it compares them. And you specify what is preferable. And for us it's going to be, let's say, less distance to the eye is preferable. And if the distance between of the 2 fish we're comparing is the same, we'll compare the angle. We want the least amount of head turn. And if that's the same, well, then we go to the age. The age is never the same between things, so we don't worry about that. So now we have the smarts hooked up. And if we go into play mode and we turn on debug, we can actually see that we can see the sensing and scoring mechanics in action by these lines drawn. The lines show, they draw to the center of what can be seen, all the things that can be seen. And then there's also lines for groups of fish that are thinking together. But this is just a visualization. Let's actually use that data to drive the fish. So we go back to our drive. And we're going to keep that little ambient drive going, but we're going to combine it. And this is the only drive node that can take multiple inputs. So we'll take this and we'll put it far away over here. And then we're going to start dealing with mass nodes. And mass is what we term for the center of things, all things that can be sensed. So this is going to take the mass location, which is the average of all boids that can be seen by the fish, and it's going to subtract the thinking fish's position and get a vector. And we're going to scale that vector by 1. Actually, we're going to scale it by 5. We're going to scale that vector by 5, and we're going to say a limit of force to 400. And using 400 means that it will override our 200 in the ambient. So that's how you deal with the forces. And these forces are all brain forces. Again, each species does what it will with these forces that we send it. So let's see how this looks. So now we can see, whoa, they all, once they spot each other, they zoom right at it. That means that we have a really strong mass force there. And we can see it's even starting to get a little unstable. Because what happens when one of these fish just get deserted? Well, this. They can't see anything. They don't know what to do. They just run that dumb logic gate. Oh, and then he saw someone else, and now he's joining the flock. So that's how the sense, score, and mass nodes work. There are more mass nodes, such as mass rotation, which gets the fish to face the average orientation of the other fish it sees. And we'll set a max of 300 on that. And we'll take a look at what that does. And I'm gonna turn off the debug for this, but you can get an idea from here. Now I will turn off the debug. Now you can see it much better. Now, so they're all following each other, and another technique we can use in the drive is to have a branch, and we'll say a lone branch. And what the alone branch does is it says, do I see anything? Am I alone? If you're alone, then let's take our old drive gate and let's do that. And we'll disconnect it from the combine. So now that ambient force that we were doing before is only going to run when the fish sees nothing. And we're going to amp up the strength on it because of that. We're going to go 400 and 600. Or 400 and 400. Now you'll see we've got some very fast fish and then some following fish. As soon as they don't see something in front of them, then they just start on that huge gate logic. And the Boid's kind of getting out of control. It's going all over the place, way far away from its origin, which is fine. I mean, if that's what you want, but most of the time you're gonna want them to stay in some proximity. So I'll show you the box node. We'll make a box with the extents of 1,000 centimeters, which is 10 meters, and its extent, so the actual box will be 20 meters in dimension. And then once the fish starts intersecting a side, we'll apply 50 force units to push it back to the center immediately. And then as it gets closer to further out, we'll apply more force, but we're going to limit the force to 700. We're going to limit that to 700, not 7,000. And when I'm coming up with these numbers, I'm just thinking about the other forces working in combination to have enough force to actually push over. So actually I'm probably going to use 900 on these, because I think there's two 400s in here somewhere. Yeah, so that would be 800. So 900 means, well, it should overpower that. It should keep it inside the box. And then there's this turn power thing on Z. That would be sides of X and Y. We're gonna apply 500 rotational torque brain units to turn it around to face the center of the box. And we're going to center the camera. So you'll see here, as they get further out, they get pushed back in. So they are staying within that box, and they're not, it looks natural for the most part. You can, of course, you can tune it better. But what I'm noticing here is that they're actually overlapping a lot. And we have a node for that. So we'll add an avoidance. We'll add an avoidance at 1 meter away. We're gonna have no force. And then at the closest force, we'll have, let's say 500. And we're gonna limit it to 500. So now, once they start grouping up on each other, they're going to avoid each other. They don't overlap anymore. As long as they can see the thing that they're about to hit, they won't overlap. So, another type of force. If you notice, they started going upside down a lot. We have a keep up force. And we'll apply up to 400 degrees per second in brain to have Z match Z up. Now you can see that they don't point up as much, and they don't roll around as much. And if I lower that strength of that, then it'll allow for more of it. So I set it to 100. It'll allow for more stuff, but it'll still prefer to be upright. Now, so scalability. So there's 100 fish in this flock. So let's make 10 of these. And let's see what happens. So we've got 120 frame rate. So each one of these different Boid actors, they're only concerned about Boids in their own Boid. But there are ways that we can have them interact with each other still. But that's how this frame rate's getting. I mean, it's still intact beyond just the excellent optimizations in art. That is 1,000 fish. And they're all thinking and seeing at 480 times a second. If I double that number, it's a lot of fish. I get around 60 frames. And like at this point, little changes to that Boid graph will make differences in the speed of processing. And you'll see the behavior will change drastically if I change the type of fish to something like a golden angelfish. The turns are different, and they respond differently because all the brain forces are applied differently per species to try and get them to resemble their real life counterpart. Now I'm going to take half of these, and we're going to set them to conspicuous angelfish. And you can see the difference in behavior there as well. And something like a Moorish idol will make some of these. They turn much differently than other things. They're very graceful. But they're all using the same behavior graph. I hope this has been interesting, and we're hoping you'll like our game.